Thank you very much, and welcome everyone to this afternoon's meeting of the Audit and Accounts Committee. I should just check, first of all, that we are quorate. We have 1, 2, 3. Yes, we have sufficient members, fortunately. Just. Good. The County Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please do feel free to take pictures and to use social media during the meeting. But please do ensure that your phone is set to silent or vibrate whilst the meeting is taking place. The meeting is being live streamed and a recording will be available to view later on the County Council's website. There isn't any fire alarm scheduled for today, so if the alarm sounds, it's likely to be a real alarm, and I'll adjourn the meeting and we'll leave by the side doors to my left-hand side, and we'll use the external staircase to assemble in the car park. Good. We move on to agenda item 1, notification of the Chair and Vice Chair for 2025-2026. For the record, we're asked to note that the Council appointed me, Councillor Chris Bowden, as the Chair of the Audit and Accounts Committee for 2025-26, and has appointed Councillor Peter Fain as the Vice Chair for the year. And I'll use this opportunity to say 1 or 2 words. First of all, I'd like to pay tribute to Councillor Graham Wilson and Councillor Nick Gay, who've been the Chair and Vice Chair of this committee for 4 years. It's been chaired and vice-chaired in a very sensible way. We've been effective, partly because we've not been party political at all. And that's something I'd like to be able to carry on from the Chair. And Graham in particular, I'm pleased that we've got you on the committee still. Your knowledge will be helpful to us. Unfortunately, we won't have Councillor Gay because he did not get re-elected. Councillor Wilson in the last 4 years had a fairly relaxed attitude towards members speaking. The Constitution can be quite strict about when members are called, but in this committee in particular, it can be helpful if someone is asking a question and they get an answer to allow them a supplementary, and maybe even a supplementary to that, and maybe even another supplementary after that, because we are an inquiring committee at the end of the day. So as long as I feel as though a member is onto something, I'll be more than happy to accommodate that member continuing to ask questions. It won't be what we see in other committees, but it makes a great deal of sense in the Audit and Accounts Committee. And finally, if any member sees an item on the agenda coming up and they would like to get their question in first and to get a comprehensive answer, I'd more than welcome you sending me an email in advance stating what your question is, so that can be shared with the officer concerned. They can be prepared to give an answer. We're not here to try and catch officers out. We're here to try and get information. So if we're able to ask the officers give notice of those questions to officers earlier on, we most likely will get better answers than might otherwise be the case, because we can't always rely on every bit of information being at the tip of an officer's tongue. Good. So those are my initial comments. We move on to agenda item 2, apologies for absence and declarations of interest. This is well, I'll ask the Democratic Services Officer, first of all, to report if there are any apologies.
Thank you, Chair. No apologies received.
Thank you very much. Does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? Now, I do remind you all that declarations of interest are recorded anyway in your declarations of interest register, so you don't need to redeclare anything you've already declared. But if you wish to, because you think it helps for transparency, then that's not a bad thing. And if there is anything which is not on your register of interests which you need to declare, now is the ideal time to do it. I see no declarations. I do remind you that declarations can be made at any point during the course of the meeting. And if it occurs to you during the debate that there's something where you do have an interest, please don't hesitate to interrupt and to declare your interest, because that's really important. Right, so we can now move on to agenda item 3, which are the minutes of the last meeting, which took place on the 27th of March 2025, and the minutes action log. Now, the committee is being asked to approve the minutes of the meeting as an accurate record. And this item, I do emphasize, relates to the accuracy of the minutes only, and isn't really an opportunity to ask questions or to reopen the discussion on the topics recorded. So are there, first of all, any objections to the minutes? No. So I'll take that as read, and I will sign this shortly. And do any members have any questions or comments on the minutes action log? And this is the opportunity for people, if they want to raise something which was on the minutes, to say, well, why isn't it recorded in such and such a way on the minutes action log? So this is a way of getting round the last comment I made. So do any members have any comments to make on the minutes action log? Peter first.
Thank you, Chair. With me while I get my, there we are. I see on page 16, terms of reference to be circulated, June. Is that something we're going to, this is in relation to, bear with me while I just find the relevant reference. Okay, so calling up the action log, the terms of reference will be circulated to the committee when available, likely to be in June. This is the internal audit progress report, item 1. Have I missed those, or are we going to come to them later?
Well, we are only just in June, it has to be said.
Yes.
Does any officer have any comment? Mairead, please.
Thank you. They are currently in my inbox for me to review, and once I've reviewed, they'll be shared with the committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other comments? Councillor Wilson.
Two things. If we can deal with one first, and then I'll come back to the second one. On page 14, it refers to PSA determining the amounts which BDO can recover from the council. And it says that the information was provided to the chair and vice chair of this committee. Is that you as chair, and are you able to share that information with others of us who were concerned about how much we were likely to be paying BDO? I recall former councillor Nick Gay, for instance, used to say, why on earth are we paying BDO anything for the time that it's taken them to determine the objections, and in particular?
Thank you very much. To answer your first question, yes, that is the new chair and vice chair, and the information was circulated to us. I haven't got it on the top of my head, but it's quite possible that Michael Hudson may have it right off the top of his head. But if he hasn't, we can circulate that. I see no reason at all why we shouldn't circulate that information to everyone, unless it can be given straight away.
I missed some of the detail of the question, sorry, Councillor Wilson, but in terms of the actual response states the amount I think that was involved. The main element of PSA's determination was confirming, I think, that BDO had already discounted the fee before it was charged to the council. So PSA determined that there was work that BDO had done that it wasn't billed for as part of that.
Well, that's reassuring to know. It will be interesting to see the PSAA determination, if that was possible. If we could send that round to others.
I see no reason, unless officers can give me a reason, I see no reason why that information couldn't be shared with all members of the committee. Yes, yes, we should be able to do that. The very unfortunate thing, of course, is the PSAA basically are the final determinant of this, and short of having a legal challenge, which I don't think would get us anywhere at all, what they say goes. And you had a second point to raise, Graham.
Yes, please, Chris. So we had an extremely helpful meeting of the last committee with the internal auditors, Mairead, and external auditors, Sarah from KPMG, on the 27th of March. So this was in the run-up to the last elections, and the note of that meeting didn't come to a committee, and it hasn't come to this committee yet. I've circulated it to Stephen Moyer, the Chief Executive, and he's happy with the recommendations that we made, with the exception of one relating to risk. So I would be interested in the views of this committee on that element, either by sending round that note or Mairead commenting about what is proposed imminently, please.
Thank you. Well, we have quite a bit of development which is going to take place on risk over the course of this forthcoming year. Mairead, would you care to give an answer to that particular question?
Thank you. So this committee will receive the annual risk report, which will include the updated risk strategy at its next meeting. That will also be going to Strategy, Resources and Performance Committee in June, and to CLT Risk and Assurance meeting later on this week. One of the actions within the existing audit strategy was for CLT to consider whether there would be benefit to having some form of external review or assessment of the risk management function at Cambridgeshire within sort of by 2026, I think, was the deadline that we had set in the strategy. So that's something that will be going to the CLT Risk and Assurance Forum for a discussion, and then we can bring back the outcomes of that discussion to SRPC and this committee through the risk report.
Thank you. So, Graham, we'll have a couple of opportunities to raise this if necessary over the course of the next couple of meetings. Is that satisfactory to you? Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. So if there's nothing else about the minutes action log, we'll take that as noted. Thank you very much indeed, members. Item 4 is petitions and public questions, and none have been received this time. So we can move on quite happily to agenda item 5, which is financial reporting and related matters. And this is a standing item on the committee. It comes to every meeting that we have. And Stephen Howarth, who is the head of finance, will introduce this report. Stephen.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon. So this report provides the committee with an update on statutory financial reporting and external audit for recent financial years. Just as a bit of an additional background for committee, so each year the Council prepares its statutory accounts based on international financial reporting standards, which are then adapted for local government through the SIPFA Code of Practice. Those accounts are then subject to external audit, with the external auditor also undertaking a value for money review and then determining any objections to our accounts that are lodged by local electors. Once those processes are complete, a final audit certificate can be issued. The local audit sector nationally saw a lot of disruption in recent years, with audits not being concluded by statutory deadlines and large backlogs building up across the country, culminating in this council and in a number of others with no audit taking place in the financial year 2022-23 at all, which has caused problems that are still being grappled with. The government has tried to reset this with several backstop dates or deadlines by which audits need to be completed. Otherwise, auditors will give a disclaimed opinion, which is effectively the auditor saying they've not or could not do enough work to give a full audit view on the accounts. So a bit of additional background. This report then provides an update on the position 4 years prior to 2024-25's accounts for the Council, which did until recently have several items outstanding, up to and including audit fees, as we just heard about, that prevented fully closing off those years' accounts and totally finalising them. And the committee has previously received extensive updates on those. And now, other than for one item relating to 23-24's audits, all of those prior year items are concluded. So hopefully some briefer reports going forward on this item. The remaining item on 23-24's accounts relates to dealing with an objection to the accounts. Turning to the year that has just ended, 2024-25, so work is ongoing now as we speak to prepare the Council's accounts for that year ahead of the statutory publication deadline for the draft accounts of the end of June. That preparation is progressing quite well. We believe we are on track to deliver the accounts by the deadline. The highest risk dependency for producing our accounts remains the asset valuation process, so valuing the Council's land and buildings mainly, and that underpins entries in all of the Council's core financial statements and a number of disclosure notes. It's a complex process involving an externally commissioned valuer. And this year has taken a bit longer than planned due to extensive quality assurance checks linked partly to some audit differences that were identified during the last year's audit that we're trying to address. And we've closed that process off and moved now fully to preparing the draft accounts for 24-25. Regardless of that audit, it's worth saying ahead of time that we expect to receive a disclaimed opinion again from KPMG for 24-25's audits on the basis that the auditor still can't get enough assurance to give a full opinion following there being no audit in 22-23 and the consequent impact of that on assurance over opening balances in the accounts in the previous year and for the 24-25 accounts as well. That's common across a large number of councils across the country, but we nevertheless hope to minimise identified audit differences and work towards building up full assurance and getting a fully unmodified opinion in a later year. The paper gives a bit of additional background on the wider issues and what the government is proposing to do about them, but I won't expand on that any further in the intro. So thank you, Chair. I'll happily answer any questions.
Thank you, Stephen, and particular thanks for giving the timeline in your report about what happened in last year and the year before and the year before and the year before and the year before and the year before. It brought back some difficult memories from the process we've been through, and we hope that the future is going to be easier, although I've got my suspicion that one or two problems will emerge with new requirements. Members, do you have any questions or comments to make about this report, please? Graham.
Just one relating to the disclaimed opinion, which a number of councillors are going to have to deal with. How will this affect local government reorganisation? And do we have any idea yet? There are lots of different options that are being looked at, and merging of lots of local authorities, all of which are going to have disclaimed opinions, is going to make a real muddle of final accounts. And it's those final accounts which are going to have to be added together for decisions about what might or might not happen in the future.
Much to my disappointment, Graham, Michael has volunteered to answer this question. I was looking forward to giving you an answer myself, but that would have been a much more political answer. Michael.
Thank you, Chair. I think with any position, as we've seen from those that have gone before, the bringing together of a large number of accounts will be a difficult task, come what may, in whichever form that guise is then ultimately taken. As it stands at the moment, clearly we are all our own individual organisations, and we work towards completing our audit and try and move that as fast forward through the next 2 or 3 years in terms of the removal of the disclaimer. Honestly, I think that would be 27 at the earliest, so 27, 28, I think is realistically. That kind of goes into the vesting period. So it's one of the things that as Section 151 officers, we will have discussions about and flag as an early risk in terms of what we've got in terms of the provision, any risks that flow from that. I also understand that CITFA are looking at this and are making some views in terms of that position for those authorities that will go through this process. So as it stands at the moment, we will try and manage that process as officers as best as we can, working collaboratively. But as it stands at the moment, we each have our duty in terms of our own individual authority to improve and maintain a high standard of accounts production, accounts working papers.
And if I may give maybe a more practical answer in terms of the specific question you raised about what the position would be if we continue to have disclaimed opinions in one or more of the councils which form a new unitary. If, and assuming that we're still having a vesting date of the 1st of April 2028, which is by no means certain, but if that is the case, then if any of the accounts of any of the constituent authorities making up a new unitary for the year 27-28 have a disclaimed opinion, it is going to be very difficult for the new auditors to be able to satisfy themselves as to the opening balances for the new authority, and therefore it is highly likely, without putting words into the auditor's mouth, it's highly likely that the first set of accounts at the very least of the new unitary would have to have a disclaimed opinion itself. That obviously depends upon the individual circumstances, but I would see it as being it's going to be a very difficult process anyway, especially with the disaggregation of one or more councils, possibly only one, and the disaggregation process itself produces enormous problems when it comes to opening balances and not for closing balances, but for opening balances. So that first new year of the audit of the new unitary authorities will provide some challenges. I think I'll put it no more strongly than that. Any other questions or comments on this report? No. Good. Oh,
Sorry.
I do apologise. We do have Mohammed Hussain present virtually, and Mohammed is our independent, non-voting co-opted member. Mohammed, my apologies, I didn't see your hand.
No worries, thank you. I just had a question on the 24-25 accounts. It's good to see that we're looking at property valuations a lot earlier and dealing with some of the challenges that we had from external audit last time round. Similarly, are we looking at things like this land and the Cambridge and Counties Bank in terms of some of the challenges we had around the valuation, kind of taking those learnings on board just to make sure that we're a bit more streamlined on those kind of subjective areas of the accounts?
I'll start off by asking Stephen this question because Stephen's in charge of preparing the accounts. Stephen.
I mean, the short answer is yes. We are putting, so the pension fund will be putting more consideration around the value of the bank that was referenced, and then in terms of this land and the balances there, so the council is working with the audit and preparing extensive working papers to underpin the assumptions that are in the accounts or the values that are in the accounts about this land, including taking external advice on that as well.
Thank you. Is that okay, Mohammed?
Yeah, thank you. It was just, I think there was some specific control recommendations that were made in a value for money reports, just making sure that those have been taken into consideration.
Thank you, Stephen.
Provide a bit, so yeah, and I referenced the extensive quality assurance process around the asset valuations in particular, which was one of the recommendations that was identified last year.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Any other questions or comments? Well, we're merely being asked to note this report, so thank you very much indeed, Stephen, and the report is duly noted. We can move on to the next agenda item, item 6, and this is the draft external audit plan for 2025-26. Now, Sarah Brown, who is a partner at KPMG, is the external audit lead, and she will introduce this report. Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Stephen, for covering a lot of the information about disclaimers and backstops. So,
Sarah, could you just move the microphone slightly?
Yeah, is that better? Thank you. So this is the report that sets out essentially the plan for the external audit of the financial statements ending March 2025. I am conscious that we've got a few members here that were around last year and new ones, so I'll try to get the balance right. But obviously anything I don't cover in sufficient detail, please do ask me questions at the end. If you were interested, I might also suggest that the new members to this committee perhaps have a look at our final audit report of last year, which is published in the February meeting minutes, because there's quite a lot of context there that might be helpful. I won't re-go over the issues around backstop and disclaimer unless obviously you've got any questions at the end. But some other elements of the report that I think are important. Page 4 sets out our materiality. This is based essentially on revenue as a benchmark, or expenditure, which is very similar to revenue, which is consistent across the sector, and we will report any unadjusted audit differences that we identify above 1.2 million. They will all come back to this committee. In terms of the timing of our audit, which comes onto the following page, we've set a timetable already with management, and we do expect to be able to commence and hopefully conclude on a number of elements of the audit far sooner than we did last year, which were for inevitable reasons outside of everybody's control. So as was talked about, we're already having discussions around some of the larger judgmental areas such as this land and valuation of properties. That's already started. And so we will obviously continue to report back progress to this committee as the year goes on. On that same page, we also talk about the specialists that we will use. And I think importantly on this audit, we do rely upon our Pension Centre of Excellence, who are actuaries who undertake all of the work around the pensions. And we use our valuation experts to review PPE and investment property valuation. The next page sets out the significant risk areas that we have as areas of focus. These are largely in line with those that were involved previously. We focused on last year, the first one being valuation of land and buildings. Obviously, the portfolio of land and buildings is significant, and therefore it's a very large number in the accounts. Valuation of investment properties, which is largely the commercial properties owned by the council. There were some issues that we identified in relation to this last year, which management are obviously fully aware of. The valuer are fully aware of, and so we're planning on a very early assessment of the valuation to identify any potential issues and hopefully iron those out as soon as possible. Management override of controls is a standard audit area of focus, which is largely focused on mitigating fraud and through journals, etc. Valuation of post-retirement benefits is essentially our review of pensions, and recoverability of the long-term debtor with this land was quite an area of focus last year. We know that management have undertaken quite extensive work. They've sought advice, and therefore, again, that's something that we'll want to look at as early as possible in the audit process. The other audit risks aren't of the same level of significance, but they'll be covered as part of the audit. There's quite a lot of detail then on the following pages around the approach essentially to each of those audit areas, which I won't go through in detail, but again, very happy to answer any questions. And then most of the rest of the report is for information. There's just a couple of things I think it's worth drawing out. Page 21 sets out our approach to the work over value for money. As in the previous year, our approach is essentially to issue a questionnaire to management. We then hold various meetings across the council, not just with the finance team, and we will report our initial risk assessment, hopefully to the next audit committee. So you should expect that. And then our final conclusion, we're aiming to do by November, which is the statutory expectation. And then finally, on page 26, we set out our audit fees. Those audit fees are essentially the scale fees as agreed with the PSAA. I will pause there, but take any questions on any other elements of the report.
Just before asking for any questions, you deliberately skipped over the backstop. And given the size of that number compared with the size of the numbers in the accounts as a whole, I just wonder, especially given that we have new members of the committee, if you'd give a very brief explanation, very brief overview of the backstop, what it is and what it isn't. Please put your microphone on.
Yeah, no, sorry, absolutely. So the backstop date essentially has been introduced as a way of trying to create some consistency in the reporting of financial statements across local government. As was talked about in Stephen's paper, there were a number of years where local authorities did not receive an audit. For Cambridgeshire, that was 1 year in 22-23. For other councils, there have been numerous years that haven't received an audit. And so essentially to stop both local authorities and auditors being given all the time in the world to be able to deliver an audit, essentially these backstop dates have been introduced to force some structure to the audit process. The backstop date for the previous year was February, and therefore we were required to complete all of our work and report by the end of February, which we did. The council filed their accounts on time. This year, the backstop date is again February. However, there is an expectation that we'll have concluded our value for money work by the end of November, and that's what we're intending to do. And we would also intend to report to this committee, hopefully that we've completed at least the majority of the work by then, but we will certainly provide as a minimum a progress update to that audit committee. The backstop dates then start to reverse closer and closer to the original deadline date of September, which is where the sector hopes to get to. Can't remember the exact year we get there, but in a number of years.
Thank you. And of course, that all depends also on what changes government may decide to make so far as local government accounts are concerned, and what is included and excluded. And again, for the benefit of new members, the last time government looked at this seriously to make it simpler, they added a whole new report, the narrative report. So in fact, it made it more complicated, not less complicated, with more work for the auditors to do to check things, to make sure they were consistent with all the numbers that we had in our accounts. So we do look forward to the changes there. But I think it's difficult for new members to appreciate just how much of a mess the sector as a whole got into as far as audits were concerned. there were some councils who were many, many years behind, and it was necessary for a really radical approach to be taken, and that radical approach was for 1 or more years just not to be audited. And there weren't many alternative solutions really, which had any sense whatsoever. So that is a major change which has taken place in the last couple of years, and I hope and expect that the sector will manage now that it's not got the enormous backlog it had before, it will manage to service the requirements, and it will be made somewhat easier as well, I believe, although Sarah may disagree with this. Local government reorganisation will significantly reduce the number of councils which will need annual audits. And whilst some of those new councils may be quite complicated councils, I can't help but think that that will also help to ensure that the capacity issue that there's been in the sector as a whole will be met. And part of the problem in the sector is that within accountancy, local government accounts aren't necessarily always regarded by everyone as being the sexiest part of the industry, not necessarily always the most attractive part. I don't know why, because it's all very interesting, but unfortunately, historically, that's been the case. So thank you very much indeed for that. Does anyone have any questions to raise on the external audit plan for 24/5? Start off with Graham, please.
Thanks, Chris. On page 56 of our pack, page 32 of the plan, there's a whole section about understanding of IT, and I just wonder whether this is going to look at only the financial aspects of IT, or whether it will also include some of the cybersecurity issues that people like Marks and Spencers and the Co-op have hit the headlines with recently because of hacking of their systems. So is that something which external audit do get involved with, or is that something which internal audit themselves deal with?
Thank you, Graham. Sarah?
Thank you. So we involve our IT specialists to initially undertake, as a minimum, a risk assessment of the IT environment and the IT processes, and that will be extended to things like cybersecurity and security in general. I think it's fair to say that we don't then necessarily go on to, to undertake what you might consider to be a full audit of those areas, but it's certainly considered as part of our audit work and the level of reliance that we can place upon the IT systems. So, for example, if we identify any weaknesses in the general environment, then that might mean that we need to undertake additional substantive procedures to get comfortable over certain balances that might come from IT systems. I would, however, suggest that, as I'm sure you do as a council, that you seek additional assurance, which is perhaps a deeper dive than we might perform.
Thank you, Graham. Is that okay? Good. Peter?
Thank you, Chair. On page 35 of our paper, sorry, I think our page numbers are different from yours, but you will recognise the item immediately. Item 5, recoverability of long-term debtor with this land group. Forgive me, but a number of us are new to this committee, and I think it would be helpful to have a little bit more information, if we could, about the options being explored. I accept some of those are being explored by management, and the way in which the adequacy of, it says we will review the council's treatment of changes in the loans to and investments in this land, and ensure that these are in line with the code of practice and relevant accounting standards. Perhaps you could give us a brief outline of what the expectations might be for that.
Of course. I think it's perhaps appropriate for Michael to talk through the options that are being explored, because I know that's been changing over recent months. But essentially, what we are aware of and that we identified last year and had numerous conversations with management was that effectively the business plan for this land and what it will essentially be doing over the next few years has been under some review and scrutiny by the council. Within the council's accounts, there is a long-term debtor of approximately 120 million and a small investment. Our audit risk concern is that that isn't fully recoverable, and therefore we would expect as a minimum an impairment assessment to be undertaken to determine what, if any, impairment needs to be made in this year's financial statements. So what we will essentially be making sure the council has done is considered the code of practice and IFRS 9 in terms of applying appropriate accounting standards to the consideration of that impairment assessment, that will be based upon what the business plan shows is recoverable and what perhaps is appropriate to be written off in the accounts. There are implications to that. For example, you need to think about the minimum revenue provision, which I know the council is doing and has taken accounting advice on. And we also raised a number of value for money recommendations as well as the accounting considerations last year. So thinking about how the council effectively is ensuring there is sufficient governance to manage the investment with this land. As I say, the previous report that came to the February committee might be helpful because there's quite a lot of detail in there, but hopefully that answers the question.
And Michael, would you care to add to that at all?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, Sarah's given a very good description there of the process that we're presently going through in terms of the impairment. We have worked with the company over the last 12 and beyond months, looking at cash flow and ensuring the ongoing the company is an ongoing company. That no going concern issues are flagged, and we will be working with KPMG to share the working papers of that. I think it's probably best that as we come to the next committee with the statement of accounts, we'll see that flow through. At this moment in time, there's an awful lot of working that is still going through to pick up the value for money report recommendations, and to ensure that we have followed through the full guidelines and the requirements. I think as Stephen alluded to earlier, we have engaged external advice to ensure that we are looking at that, fully challenging ourselves and challenging that to come forward with the right proposals, and if any impairment is needed, that we then follow the right requirements in terms of any adjustments through the accounts, which will be significantly complex to work through. So we'll provide further detail on that at the next committee.
Thank you. Peter?
Thank you. I wanted to just follow this up. I think I heard Hudson say no going concern considerations at some point in the middle of that. Did I mishear that? And perhaps if not, you could just explain what that might mean and at what point a decision might have to be taken on that.
Yeah, so obviously the consideration of going concern is one for the directors of a company, not for the council in terms of that, and certainly the external auditors who signed off this land accounts in December 2024 were satisfied with the arrangements and the going concern of that of the company, and clearly as shareholder, but also the senior lender or the only lender, the impact of cash flow is something that we're keen to ensure that the business plan is taking a long-term view on. So yeah, there are no issues of concern as it stands.
Thank you for that. I'm tempted, but I'll resist the temptation to ask you to give more information about the potential effect of the MRP on all of this, whether we're talking about an impairment provision or even talking about any element of write-off. But I think it would be appropriate for us to hear at some point in the next few months, at an appropriate time, just how MRP may be affected by this, because that will have a significant effect on current period's accounts as well, potentially. So that would be a very interesting thing to do, but maybe not today. Mohammed.
Hi, thank you. So I had two questions. One was just on the misstatements reported to the audit committee, which has been set at 1.2 million. Would it be possible to share misstatements that are identified below that level, but still quite relevant to something that might be in the 800-900K, for example. Not asking for the change for the performance materiality, as I appreciate that impacts the level of testing and cost and the rest of it. But I think it would be quite useful for the committee to see some of the other variances that you do identify during your work. And the secondary question was just on the IT systems. There's mention that there's no automated controls you can place reliance on. It was just a question if there's any other sort of council audits that you look after that you might be able to place reliance on automated controls, and if you were, what kind of controls are those? Just so we can get a view of is that something we could look into in the future.
Thank you. Let's start with the first question, which is to do with differences which are below the figure of just under 1.2 million, which has been given to us. I'll ask Michael first, because ultimately it is for this committee, but these accounts are our accounts. So, Michael, what is your reaction to that? Because I'll let you speak.
I can't remember which councillor asked the same last year, so it's a very good question. And our approach has been we disclose everything, whether it's £1 or £1.2 million. Our view is that we take the rules of openness and transparency very seriously, and we'll share everything with this committee.
Thank you, and I do give you an assurance, Michael. I didn't plant that question with Peter. He came up with it quite independently, and of course, it's not necessary for us to see this because it wouldn't necessarily affect the judgment which is made about the accuracy of the accounts and the opinion which is given. But having said that, in my opinion, there are other advantages to gain from this, because if we see that there are differences, it might indicate an issue in another part of the council which we'd like to look at more deeply. So the willingness of officers to share this information with us is very much appreciated by this committee. And then the second question that was, first of all, Mohammed, are you satisfied with that
That
answer?
makes sense. Perfect.
Good.
Thank you.
And the second one was to do with automated controls. Sarah.
Thank you. Yes, and this point is largely linked to the reliance that we are expected to place on controls, specifically around journals and journal authorisation. It is very typical, not just in the local authority sector, but actually with the majority of companies that we work with, that we are unable to rely on the automated control. The reasons being that the bar that's effectively set by auditing standards is very high. It expects that there is a system control that is so tight that there could be no manual override at all. That is very difficult, particularly where you've got financial systems that don't necessarily allow that. It can also be difficult if you've got a number of members of staff who have, for example, privileged access, who might be able to go around the system, which is needed for certain reasons. And therefore, what we often say is that whilst we can't rely on that control, we understand the proportionality of the controls that you have in place. So what I would say is that what we would bring back to this committee is if we felt that the manual controls that were in place to compensate that were insufficient, we would raise a recommendation and bring that to the audit committee's attention. But actually not reaching that very high bar set by the auditing standards is quite common, and we don't necessarily expect you to invest millions of pounds in an IT system simply to meet that control.
Thank you, Sarah. Mohammed?
Sure, no, that makes sense. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. Any other questions from anyone? No? No? Good. Well, there aren't any decisions to be made on this. We've been asked to receive the draft external audit plan for 24/5 from KPMG, which we've done, and asked relevant questions. So thank you all very much indeed. And thank you, Sarah. Agenda item 7 is the Executive Director's Assurance Report for Children, Education and Families. And this report is being introduced by Martin Purbrick, the Executive Director for the Children, Education and Families Directorate. Martin.
Good afternoon. I hope you had a chance to read the report, but I'm going to pick out some highlights and summarise some of the actions that we've taken over the past year. So during the last reporting year, we've had continued oversight from the Children's Social Care Regulator, Ofsted. Firstly, we submitted our Improvement Action Plan in response to the ILAC's inspection of February and March 2024, and this was subsequently approved by Ofsted We then shared this report with our Children's Rapid Improvement Board and then Children and Young People's Committee. We have a tracker in place which ensures progress against each of the activities is being monitored and that it's having the desired impact on improving outcomes for children. Internal Audit have also reviewed the plan and its progress recently for assurance. In January this year, 2025, we had our area send inspection, also from Ofsted, but in partnership with the Care Quality Commission. There are 3 possible outcomes from this inspection. This concluded with a midpoint outcome. That the wording for that is that the local area's partnerships arrangements lead to inconsistent experiences and outcomes for children and young people with special educational needs and/or disabilities. The local area partnership must work jointly to make improvements. As a consequence of this, we are required to submit an improvement action plan to Ofsted by the 24th of June. This will be a jointly owned plan with health colleagues and will be shared with the Integrated Care Board and the CQC as well. This is on the forward plan for Children and Young People's Committee and will also go to the Improvement Board as with the previous plans. Enhanced internal governance processes implemented over the reporting period include, we have previously had a shared Children's Safeguarding Board with Peterborough. That no longer happens. We now have a Cambridgeshire-only Children's Safeguarding Partnership. That partnership has an independent scrutineer, David Derbyshire, who will provide additional challenge to us as a safeguarding partnership. Our own Internal Improvement Board continues to be chaired independently by Anthony Douglas, and in a significant step now has multi-agency representation from health, the police and education settings. Strengthened governance of financial controls includes financial transparency reports, which are now a weekly standing item on our leadership team meeting. This supports the tracking of contract management, contractual spend and procurement practice. Through this, we are identifying and challenging areas of poor practice and non-compliance, putting mitigations in place and shaping new commissioning and procurement activity in order to reduce future risks. Also related to financial oversight, Schools Forum now has a high needs block subgroup, which will provide additional monitoring for the high needs block spend and associated projects for mitigating costs and improving outcomes for children with special educational needs and disabilities, such as enhanced resource bases in our schools. For those that don't know, Schools Forum is a statutory consultative forum that enables schools and education settings across the county to have a role in decisions regarding how the local authority distributes the education grants it receives. This high needs block subgroup provides greater oversight and this high needs block subgroup provides greater oversight and partnership than has been in place before and improves transparency over a complicated budget area that has some significant pressures. Regarding internal audit recommendations, we've managed to close a further 6 actions that have been outstanding in agreement with internal audit officers since these papers were drafted. 3 related to the DSG actions and safety valve and 3 related to the multi-agency safeguarding hub actions. We have improved our tracking processes for internal audit recommendations, and this has increased accountability related to these areas. The report provided also contains a summary of the complaints that we received, the vast majority of which relate to SEND. We are working with colleagues across the council to improve our capacity and delivery for children with special educational needs and disabilities, and hope that this work will see real improvements over the course of this year. The final appendices summarises the whistleblowing reports that we've received and actions taken, and the annual governance statement action log, which had an action related to the Ofsted action plan, which I can confirm is complete. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Martin, for that report. Are there any questions or comments from members, please? Graham.
Hello, Martin. First of all, can I compliment you on the number of compliments you've received, 153. You did mention the complaints, but I should also mention the number of compliments that you've received. I'm one of the various councillors who have inquired recently a couple of times, and it's always been about SEND and the delays in assessments. And I just wonder whether there is anything that we as councillors can do to help you with that. I know you're doing an awful lot in trying to recruit staff, but is there anything else that we can be doing? Should we be allocating more resources, or what is the issue here?
Thank you, Graham. Martin?
Yep. One of the things that we put in place is our Inclusion for All strategy, which the inspection reviewed and felt that it was appropriate moving forward. It's in its early stages, so it won't have limited impact at the moment. Regarding capacity, as I mentioned in my summary, we are working with officers across the council for looking at our SEND workforce capacity, and there will be a paper going forward looking at how we're going to invest. The members have already voted to increase investment in SEND delivery, but until we've worked out exactly how we're going to deliver that in a most efficient way that will benefit children the most and families, we are working on that at the moment. So the council has already voted to increase our resource. We're just going to make sure that we spend it appropriately.
Graham? You happy with that? Good. Chief Executive.
Chair, just for the benefit of members, whilst I appreciate Councillor Wilson, I was asking Martin a question in relation to the County Council's response. I'm very conscious that we are expecting some national reforms to the Special Educational Needs and Disabilities Service arrangements from the government. Those reforms should also include substantial financial investment based on the information we're currently hearing from the Department for Education. But of course, that's all prior to the spending review, so we wait to see what the Chancellor actually says rather than what we believe she's going to say. But I do think the broader issue around special educational needs and disabilities is not only the issue we need to tackle here in Cambridgeshire, but Martin, certainly the inspection report rightly points out there are more significant reforms required because there are areas that will continue to inhibit the effective delivery of SEND, in my view, both locally and nationally, not least the continued shortfall for educational psychologists and the requirement that they have to assess every single case before we are able to put in place an education and healthcare plan. So I think there are some significant national reforms to policy and funding required, as well as our own action to improve the service. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. No other questions at the moment? Well, what struck me on the whistleblowing report section, first of all, was how few whistleblowing activities there have been in the year, which surprised me, I have to say. But secondly was the one which was directly to the Chief Executive, and that these whistleblowing reports all seemed to be non-specific, which also rather surprised me. Now, one of the problems with reporting on whistleblowing reports is you can't go into too much detail. I fully understand that. But in general terms, have I understood it correctly that there were no specific whistleblowing reports received which were directly related to individual cases rather than more general concerns about the service as a whole? Martin?
I'll pick this one up if that's okay. So we, the internal audit team, maintain the central log of whistleblowings for the council, and that picks up anything which comes through to the main sort of corporate whistleblowing service. So everything that comes through to us, we report to this committee in the annual whistleblowing report. However, sometimes whistleblowings will go through other routes, and that's absolutely fine. We want to encourage that, and we want to ensure that people feel comfortable whistleblowing to their line managers, etc., if that's appropriate. So the director's assurance statements will bring to you any whistleblowings which have not come through that centralized route and not come through kind of my team. And the aim of that is to give you assurance that even when whistleblowings are raised through an alternative route within a directorate, that they are still being monitored, dealt with appropriately. So I think it is probably a good sign that the central whistleblowing mechanism is picking up most of the cases, but also that people are comfortable coming through other routes. And sometimes where external agencies are involved, they will naturally contact the relevant director as well. So it's just a way of ensuring that everything is picked up.
That's really helpful. Thank you very much indeed. Any other questions or comments from anyone? Well, again, this is an information-only report. We don't require any vote, but I'd like to thank Martin Perdrick for producing this report. And I'd also like to thank him for the amount of work which has gone in the whole of the directorate over the course of the last year and a half, especially. There have been some really big challenges, some of which remain, and it's particularly difficult to ensure that risks are properly controlled and that we have a forward direction of travel so far as the directorate is concerned. So I do congratulate Martin on that, and I think Martin will be the first to agree there's still a lot of work to be done. But I'm very grateful indeed for this report which is being produced. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you very much.
Right, we can now move on to item 8 on the agenda, which is the Internal Audit Annual Report for 2024-25. And Mairead Clayton, the Head of Internal Audit and Risk Management, will introduce this report. And Mairead, may I just ask at this point, in your short introduction, would you be kind enough to just explain to members and to members of the public what the meaning is of having a moderate assurance on controls? I think that word moderate needs some explaining for those who haven't come across it before in this context. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. Okay, so this is really the key internal audit report that is produced each year. Our annual report, which sets out my opinion as the head of internal audit on the overall adequacy and the effectiveness of the organisation's framework of governance, risk management and control. So section 3 of the report is something that I would direct members to initially, as it covers the definitions of different assurance ratings that we use, and it also sets out the way that coverage by the internal audit team is planned throughout the year in order to align effectively with the different types of risk that the council faces. So the key part of the report is the annual opinion that is presented at section 2. And I set out that I have given a moderate assurance opinion over the system of internal control. So when we say moderate, I am using the definitions that are set out on page 110 of your pack. So with regards to the control environment, that means the policies, the procedures and controls that we have in place to manage risk across the council. Moderate indicates that there are control weaknesses that present a medium risk to the control environment. And with regards to compliance, moderate indicates that the controls in place have generally operated as intended, but some errors have been detected. So in giving this opinion, the full detail of the supporting evidence that has led to this opinion is set out in section 4 of the report and in the preceding progress reports that have been brought to the previous iteration of this committee throughout the 2024-25 financial year. Key things that I would highlight include at section 4.1, we can see that overall the assurance opinions from individual pieces of audit work this year show a predominance of moderate opinions. We have seen a decrease in the proportion of limited opinions compared to the previous 2023-24 audit year, which is positive, and it shows a good direction of travel. I would also note that this year we have seen that limited opinions, when they are given, have been spread over a wider range of different areas rather than being so concentrated on particular areas of risk. And similarly, where we're seeing audits with a good assurance opinion, those are also spread across different assurance areas and different risk themes. So again, that suggests that issues are more isolated rather than systemic to particular types of risk. The implementation of audit actions shows some improvement compared to the previous year. So we've seen 79% of actions implemented this year compared to 75% for 23-24. That is particularly positive as we've had 60 more actions due for implementation in 24-25 compared to the previous financial year. I have got a quick update on some of the key financial systems work. So within the report, we've noted that key financial system reviews have not been issued as final reports yet for various reasons. I can now report we have had a draft report on accounts payable from our colleagues at Northamptonshire. That's giving a good opinion for the control environment and a good opinion for compliance with a low overall impact on the organisation. So that's a positive finding. The debt recovery draft is currently with me to review before it can be issued. Currently, that's looking like like a good opinion on the control environment and compliance, but a moderate opinion on the organisational impact, which is due to the scale of the debt presently. And the payroll fieldwork is about 80% complete, so I should be able to bring you an update on the outcomes of that at the next meeting of this committee. The report also highlights some of the key areas of risk and focus for the council and the audit team, including financial pressures, procurement and contract management, project management, and health and safety. The report does include sections on whistleblowing and investigations and risk management, as these are functions which are managed within the Internal Audit and Risk Management Service. I would note to the committee that there will be a full annual risk report coming to your next meeting in July, and then an annual whistleblowing report which comes to you in November. So you will receive further detail on those areas within those separate annual reports. Then I would also draw the committee's attention to section 7 of the report. That sets out some key information on the team's performance and the internal audit team's quality assurance and improvement programme. Table 5 sets out some key metrics around delivery of the audit plan, and Table 6 shows our customer feedback outcomes. We've flagged at the start of the report that in line with global internal audit standards and the CIPFA Code of Practice, the Audit Committee needs to satisfy itself on the effectiveness of internal audit, taking into account things like conformance with the standards, interactions with the committee, performance and feedback from senior management. Recognising this is your first meeting, that's not intended to be a single one-off process, but it should be continuously something that the committee is considering throughout the year. However, as the annual report does provide some of the really key evidence and information to support the committee's assessment, we have flagged this as one of the recommendations within the report. And I recognise that was a lot of talking, so I will leave it there and ask for any questions.
Thank you, Mairead. Start off with any questions? Nothing immediately from anyone? Okay, well, I will start. Oh, sorry, Graham, good, you've saved me.
I just felt one should ask a question. I was very impressed by this report, but just looking at chart 5, which you did mention briefly on page 126, the outcomes of schools' finance governance audits, so not directly our responsibility, but the number of limited audits for control system opinions seems to be very high in 2024-25 compared with previous years. And I just wonder whether there's a generic reason for that and whether that matters, so something we should be concerned about.
Thank you. Yes, it's a good observation. The key issue which has contributed to that is around the level of deficit recovery plans in place at the schools that we've reviewed. I think we looked at 7 schools in the sample which were in deficit, and we found that the deficit recovery planning that was being produced by the schools at that point wasn't sufficient really to address the deficits in place. So essentially, we found that schools were operating in deficit without an approved licence to do so, which does represent a financial sustainability risk to the council. Now, we had, prior to the current, the 2024-25 round of schools audits, undertaken an audit specifically looking at schools' deficit recovery plans, and agreed several actions to establish sort of just a stronger process for managing schools in deficit, including an escalation protocol and clarity on roles and responsibilities for schools. Those actions are currently being progressed, and we would expect that when they are implemented fully, that we will see an improvement in the management of schools that are in deficit.
Graham.
Just follow that up. So are heads and chairs of governors aware of the issues, and people like Michael actually actively dealing with it? Because if these are schools, as you say, under our control rather than academies, we might be very concerned that they're getting themselves into a deficit without any plan to deal with it.
Thank you. Yes. So in terms of the individual findings at specific schools, we provide an audit report which goes to the head teacher and the chair of governance chair of governors, excuse me, at each school. And then that is shared with the full governing body of the school. So all governors at a school should be aware of the findings of the audit. Then in terms of the sort of corporate control and oversight at Cambridgeshire, we produce a single overarching report which brings together the findings from all the individual schools reviews that we do over the year. And that then addresses control weaknesses on sort of the council side of the system. And so that is taken forward in the normal way through liaising with colleagues in education and in the school's finance team. Yes.
Thank you. Stephen?
Thank you, Chair. Just to supplement Mairead's point, and I guess to Councillor Wilson's comment, particularly mindful of those schools that are grant maintained and therefore have a more direct relationship with the County Council. The Education Service and certainly the school's finance team work very closely alongside the heads and indeed governing bodies where schools are getting into deficit positions. The Education Director has the opportunity to formalise and escalate those arrangements if the deficit plans aren't being robustly put forward, addressed and actioned. And I think particularly importantly, the information around schools heading into deficit or giving cause for concern is discussed at the schools forum, which the Executive Director referenced earlier in the meeting. So I think it would be fair to say that the measures around escalation, taking action, and certainly the County Council's Education Service supported by finance, both acting to intervene but also helping the schools to try and address the issues where at all possible, is something that's actually quite well embedded in the way we work, and it's obviously very well informed by the work that internal audit undertake on individual school activity. I have to say, if you forgive me, I'll stick with my broken theme for the day. There is a fundamental issue around funding for schools, and I will say this because I suspect those members who have been on the council previously and have returned, and indeed other members will be aware from their interaction with schools, Cambridgeshire schools are significantly underfunded compared to other parts of the country, both per head in terms of pupils, but also in terms of broader allocations. So the pressures our schools are bearing, whether they're primary or secondary, whether they're grant maintained or academy, are actually just becoming more severe over time because of the chronic underfunding that this county has relative to other parts of the UK. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Are you satisfied, Graham? With the answers, that is.
Well, I hear what Stephen says. We have to make do with the money that we're being provided by government, and for schools to get themselves into a muddle, as they clearly are, the main thing is we are helping them out of this muddle, which is what Stephen, I think, was starting off at, which is excellent.
Stephen?
Chair, we are helping schools as best we can and within the powers we have. I will just illustrate the point I was making earlier, given some of the recent announcements around teachers' pay awards. The Department for Education is not fully funding those pay awards, so there will be a further impact on schools' budgets, whether they're in academies or indeed in grant-maintained schools. So I have to say, we can do what we can, but government needs to play its part in terms of ensuring the school system is sustainable financially, never mind in terms of outcomes for pupils. And I will just reaffirm the point. Cambridgeshire gets a worse deal than other parts of the country, which seems deeply unfair to me and doesn't help schools become viable in the long term. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Graham. Mohammed.
Thank you. So I had a couple of questions just around section 7. There's a table that kind of shows the audit team productivity. At the moment, it looks like it's at sort of 91, 92% in terms of time spent on audits for the team against a target of sort of 85, and that seems to have ticked up a little bit over the last year as well. I think it also excludes another sort of 150 days, which are used to support other councils. It's just a question around: are we building enough time for training and supervision, and just making sure that we're adequately skilled going forward, and will we see this drop down in future periods?
Thank you, Mohammed. Mairead.
Thank you. So turning to the section 7.3, which is on the quality assurance and improvement plan, that does talk a little further about our continuing professional development arrangements within the team. We do try to undertake a lot of training development internally within the team. We have weekly team meetings, and these are always intended to be used as training and development sessions on kind of a range of different topics, whether that is more general local government topics, and we invite colleagues from other services in to talk to the audit team about the work that they do, or more specifically sort of bespoke training sessions around specific elements of the internal audit process. We make sure that colleagues within the team are professionally qualified or working towards a qualification. So for colleagues who are on our graduate trainee scheme, the time that they spend attending class is not included as unproductive time within that calculation. It's just excluded from the calculation as being unavailable time. And in 24-25, we've also funded 2 colleagues to undertake accredited counter-fraud specialist training. That is something that I want to try to expand within the team, because we do undertake a lot of investigations. And so increasing the number of colleagues that we have with that kind of specialism would be really helpful to us going forward. So it's definitely something that we take seriously. Yeah.
Thank you, Mairead. Mohammed?
Thank you. I just had a separate question just on the quality, the external quality assessment. There was 2 options provided in the paper. One was to look at having a group of head of audit sort of come together and kind of support looking at each other's kind of audit function, I guess providing a view on compliance with the standards. Just a question around, is there any concerns around sort of perception of independence around that, as opposed to actual issues with independence, if from a public perspective, was the first question. And also, is there any concerns where if we did go down that lens or that approach, if it turned out that the head of audit that did our review has an unfavorable opinion in 6 months later, and kind of what would that mean for the work that we've had done with that individual? So just to see if it was worth exploring what the costs would be if we went through a firm approach, and so we could weigh up the options clearly, considering we only do this once every 5 years, just to make sure that we've thought it through.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mairead.
Oh, sorry. If it's okay, I'm happy to answer that question, but can we reserve that to cover it when we do the next paper, just because I think it's more relevant to the GIS paper rather than to this one, if that's okay.
Happy with that, Mohammed?
Yeah,
Good.
sure.
Okay. Thank you. Any further questions? Lewis.
Yes, probably Stephen already probably answered a little bit of that, but I understand that we submitted an updated safety valve agreement to the Department of Education in October 2024. What is the current status of that valve agreement, and what are the risks if we fail to meet that safety valve, and what are the contingency plans?
Stephen, would you care to answer that?
Chair, I'll start, and then I suspect Michael may want to pick up as well. So thank you for the question. The current status of the safety valve agreement is the County Council has made a resubmission to the Department for Education in discussion with their advisors. As yet, we do not have ministerial consent for the revised deal. However, we are in continued discussions with Department for Education advisors, and just last week they have asked us some questions for further clarification on the model we've submitted. So that's an ongoing dialogue. At this stage, we don't have a sense that we will be rejected from safety valve, because it might also be helpful for members of the committee to hear that the government has actually closed entry to the safety valve programme. So in the nicest way of saying it, I'm not going to sound optimistic, because safety valve is addressing a long-standing issue back to the SEND reforms I outlined earlier. Cambridgeshire is probably on the right side of that equation, because at least we're in discussion with government. No other authorities are now able to enter such discussions because the safety valve programme has effectively been closed. Michael might want to pick up on some of the contingency and modelling issues, Chair. Thank you.
Michael.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, in terms of the best place to probably new councillors to look would be the Section 25 report I did to council in February of this year, where I flagged that at the moment the safety valve is being held off balance sheet, as it were, through what's called a statutory override. Since the safety valve agreement was reached, Cambridgeshire County Council, along with most other councils in the or upper tier councils in the country, have seen their level of deficit grow. So that is a deficit for us that is, even with the safety valve monies, in excess of our current provision. And if that continues to grow, would actually be in excess of our reserves position. Hence why, as the Chief Executive alluded to earlier, we are awaiting with interest news next week from the Chancellor in terms of any comprehensive spending review announcements on this matter. The statutory override lifts on the 31st of March 2026, in which point that would come onto our balance sheet and would trigger over 100 Section 114 notices across the country, given the magnitude of this position. So at this moment in time, the service has an inclusion for all approach, which is looking to drive down a balanced in-year position for special educational needs and disabilities work. That will leave a cumulative position at this present moment in time. I doubt that would be capable of being recovered if you extended the period after just getting into a balanced position under the current regime. That deficit would most likely still remain and stay with us. So this is something that government is aware of, has said it will address. And as I say, we await news which could be imminent.
Thank you. Lewis, any further questions on that? Okay, thank you very much indeed. Any other questions from anyone? One or two from me. First of all, thank you very much indeed for including in paragraph 4.11.3 the comments about the work of this committee. For the benefit of new members, we get the opportunity to examine Mairead's reports on a regular basis about internal controls and about any issues that she has raised with management in various areas. And we also see how quickly the relevant managers actually manage to address the concerns which have been raised. And I don't think I'd be exaggerating it by saying that sometimes that the speed of rectification isn't what we might hope. What we've done in the last couple of years, and it's referenced twice here, but in the last couple of years, on 3 occasions, we have referred back the recommendation from internal audit to the service committee concerned for them to be able to debate in their meetings. So we do have that power. We have started using that. And if we do find that we're not satisfied with the speed with which any internal audit recommendations are being addressed, we have that opportunity to move forwards and to get that before the members of the relevant service committee. So thank you for mentioning that, Mairead. I'll come back finally, if I may, to the moderate assurance of the system of internal control and the various individual examinations that there were, many of which were moderate, 1 or 2 of which were limited in terms of the assurance which could be provided. And I'd like you to advise members of the committee, bearing in mind some members of the committee are new, the extent to which we should have any concern, first of all, about the use of that word moderate, and secondly, the fact that in some cases you're talking about limited control, assurance on control.
Thank you. So I think it may be best to just touch a little further on some of the content of Section 3 in order to answer that question. So when internal audit look at a particular area within the council, we could be reviewing something very specific, such as government procurement cards use. We would look at what are the controls around government procurement cards, whether those are automated controls around spending need to be approved, or the controls that we have in place to ensure that not just any member of staff can get a card and spend an unlimited amount on it. We then look at the compliance with the controls. So the controls exist. Are they being followed in practice? If we believe that a system is enforcing those controls, is that working? And that gives you the first two opinions. So that would give you, ideally, your good. So good would be minor control weaknesses presenting a low risk, largely controls operating as intended with perhaps some small errors being detected. Or you may have a limited opinion. So that would be significant control weaknesses that present a high risk to the control environment and significant errors being detected within that control environment. So we give those opinions to enable you to understand the level of control in the area that has been covered by internal audit. But what that does not necessarily tell you is the answer to that question, how worried should we be about it? That's when we come to our third opinion of organisational impact. So that recognises that we may audit government procurement cards and find, poor controls in place. But if ultimately the maximum spend on government procurement cards is perhaps £600,000 a year, the impact to the organisation as a whole is minor. So that means that you can look at that limited and say, okay, it's a limited, it's not ideal, but the impact to us is less than a limited opinion in a more significant system or relating to a more significant risk. So the organisational impact opinions are something that I would really encourage the committee to consider when you're assessing your opinion and your views on the outcomes of internal audits. We use 3 impact assessments, major, moderate, minor. They're set out at 3.1.7 of this report, and they're very much what you would expect. So a major organisational impact is something where weaknesses that have been identified have left the council open to significant risk, which, if it materialises, would have a major impact on the organisation as a whole. Moderate is the council is open to medium risk, which would have a moderate impact on the organisation as a whole, and I won't go over minor. So when we look at the opinions that we have issued over the year, we have issued some areas where there were limited opinions, but we've only issued one audit where we considered that there was the potential for a major impact on the organisation, and that related to the LDP pooled budget disaggregation programme, which is discussed at section 4.1.5 of the report. So I think what you're looking for is not just the overall opinions, but also, how often are we seeing those moderate and those major organisational impacts within the opinion? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. That's very helpful, I think. And it does remind me that in 4.1.5, you did mention the LDP pooled budget disaggregation programme. And even I, who'd been on that committee for 5 years, took a few moments at least to realise what that meant. It hasn't actually been explained in here what the LDP pooled budget disaggregation programme is about. And it is always helpful to spell out. In fact, you might as well just explain now what the LDP was.
Thank you. So previously, the LDP involved a pooled budget between the council and the Integrated Care Board to work together to manage funding essentially across both social care and what would be considered healthcare lines for individuals with a learning disability. That has been in the process of being split out now, so that healthcare is provided separately and social care elements of the care are provided separately by the council and the NHS services. I will bring more detail on the findings of that audit to our next committee meeting, because that will then have the final agreed audit report out at that point. So yes, I'll bring some more detail at that point.
Thank you, and I look forward to the next meeting. Right, any further questions or comments? No. Right. Well, we'll move to the report recommendation then. And in line with Global Internal Audit Standards 8.3 and the CIPFA Code of Practice, the Council's Audit Committee must satisfy itself on the effectiveness of internal audit, taking into account conformance with the standards, interactions with the committee, performance and feedback from senior management. Are committee members so satisfied? Those in favour, please show. That's agreed by all members. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you, Mairead. Right. Well, we stay with Mairead because we now go to item 9, which is the Global Internal Audit Standards. Mairead, would you care to give an introduction to this interesting report?
Thank you, Chair. So this report covers the fact that from the 1st of April this year, internal audit services within the UK public sector have become subject to new mandatory standards, which replace the old public sector internal audit standards. It's a little complex. The standards consist of the Global Internal Audit Standards, which I'll probably refer to as GIAS, issued by the Institute of Internal Auditors. These are then also amended by an application note from the UK relevant internal audit standard setters and by a SIPFA code of practice, which is specific to UK local government. So collectively, for convenience, we will refer to them as the GIS in the UK public sector. This report provides committee with an overview of the standards themselves, as well as our first internal assessment of the service's conformance with the new standards. So as part of our work to ensure that we are compliant with the new requirements, we have fully refreshed and updated the internal audit team charter, and that is presented for this committee's approval at Annex A. There's been a range of updates. Particular ones to mention include documenting the team's mandate and a new internal audit strategy, increasing the amount of detail actually within the charter about how the audit team communicate with this committee, with senior management, and how our reporting works, and increasing the detail on the roles and responsibilities across the wider system for internal audit. We've also done things like reviewing key audit templates in our quality assurance and improvement programme. So at section 4, you will see that our assessment is that the team generally conform to the new standards. There are a few areas that we've identified for partial conformance, which are set out at section 4.4. And we've identified some further actions which are incorporated into the quality assurance and improvement plan for 2025 to 26. So a key action outlined at section 5 of the report is that we are recommending, as previously discussed with the previous Audit and Accounts Committee, that an external assessment of the team be arranged for the current financial year to give us that independent view of the team's conformance with the new GIAS standards. And we've outlined a suggested approach which we are asking the committee to agree. I will just hop back to the question which we were asked previously around this. The requirements of the new GIAS is that there can be no reciprocal assessment within the public sector anymore. So previously, I could review a colleague at a council's conformance and they could then review my team's conformance. Currently, that is no longer permissible. So what some councils are doing instead is they're forming sort of wider networks, wider groups of heads of internal audit and all agreeing to conduct an assessment of one another. So you would receive an assessment from a council, a head of audit within that group, and you would assess a different council within that group. So my proposal is that initially we explore whether that is a possibility for us, but bearing in mind that we would look to councils outside the immediate sort of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough area, because that is likely to be a more cost-effective option than completely external assessment done by SIPFA or the IIA or another external body. Hopefully that answers the question. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll come to Mohammed first on that. Are you satisfied or have any further questions?
No, I think just following up on that, I understand it's a bit of a wider network, but still there's some of that risk still there from an independence perspective, that might be relevant to think about. And also, I guess just it'd be useful to understand what the costs are, because if that's the main reason not to do it, I'll be clear on actually how material that is. Just to make a decision around that, because the other benefit I thought of a firm maybe they have a wider view of different councils as well, as opposed to one view from another council as a singular. Is other things just to be aware of.
Thank you. Mairead?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that's a fair challenge. We will be attempting to do some market research to assess exactly how much do we think it would be if we were to get an external firm or one of the professional bodies in to conduct the assessment. I suppose the other thing to note is actually a lot of councils will probably be in the same position as us this year, and therefore there may be more pressure in terms of actually managing to find someone who's got the time to complete the assessment. But I would be keen to have it done this year if possible.
Thank you. Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly to say, having previously used the Institute for Internal Auditors to undertake this very process in a previous local authority, I have to say whilst the independence obviously is slightly better, their contextual awareness of a local government environment was not as developed. So I have to say the compare and contrast experience from me previously was it was better to have another internal audit team from a council doing the work for us because they understood the operating context to a much greater degree. However, there's always a balance to be struck. So we will do the market testing that Mairead's outlined. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mohammed, are you happy with that?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Right. Any further questions? No. It was quite a hefty report, I have to say. And thank you indeed for doing all of that. And it will be interesting to see if there is any significant improvement in internal audit. Somehow I doubt that all of this is going to make the most enormous change in practical terms to how well internal audit goes. But I remain to see. But anyway, thank you very much indeed for that, Mairead. We can now move to the report recommendations. And the committee is recommended, first of all, to review and approve the proposed internal audit charter, including the internal audit mandate and the internal audit strategy, which was attached as Annex A, and to approve the proposal for an external assessment of conformance with GIAS in the UK public sector to take place in 25-26, as was set out in section 3 of the report. May I see those in favour? And that's agreed unanimously. Thank you very much indeed, members. Right, thank you, Mairead. We can now move to Debt Management Update, agenda item 10. And this is a report which will be introduced by Tom Kelly, who is the Service Director for Finance and Procurement. And Alison Balcombe, the Head of Finance Operations, is also available to answer any technical questions. So may I ask the two of you, Tom and Alison, if you'd be kind enough just to introduce this report.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. This report is about the Council's collection of monies that are owed. Recognising we have some new members of the committee, there are a whole range of organisations, both private and public, which pay the Council for services, for fees and charges. But there's a particular focus in this report on client contributions, so adult social care services. And for new members, again, this adult social care is a means-tested service. And the nature of the service means that it's often vulnerable clients who are paying for their care, sometimes managing their own care fees, sometimes managed by either professionals or family members. The committee has previously given additional focus to this area, and it is an area where we've had a rapidly increasing level of overdue debt previously. So over the past 15 months or so, we've had a focused improvement project in place around this area. And I would just highlight to the committee where we're up to in terms of performance. So taking the committee to page 244, you'll see there's been a 4.1 million decrease in the level of overall debt compared to 12 months ago. And I think the graph on page 247 is quite helpful in showing where we are specifically with adult social care services. So just to briefly explain that graph, you've got the top line showing our trajectory, where we predicted we would be in terms of increases of income and a rising level of debt, taking the council up to as much as 28 million of overdue adult social care debt. And then the bottom lighter full line, where we intend to be as a result of the improvement project that has been in place for these past months and continues. And then where we're tracking against that with that kind of thicker line in the middle that goes halfway across. And pleased to say at 21 million overdue debt or debt under management relative to the position without an improvement of 24.5 million. And the report goes through in some detail to explain some of the context for that, and in particular, the significant increase in income that's been billed and has outstripped our expectations over the course of the year. So for adult social care, I think an additional 7.8 million of income billed in 24-25 compared to a year before. Section 2. On page 245, we then outline a number of the different improvements that the council's had underway and the progress that's been made with those. I think one that stands out for me in that middle section is the number of adult social care clients with overdue debt reducing from over 3,400 to 2,600, so a steep decrease. And it kind of going on to outline the different ways that we've looked at this process, whether there's improvements in financial assessment. So this is the upstream part of the journey where clients are assessed for how much they can pay, improving the performance then at a debt collection stage. So better guidance, training, leadership, management structures in the debt team itself. Some digital advances, both how information is shared between different teams within the council and how we interact with customers, and then use of some specialist services, so estate tracing agencies and collection agents where appropriate as well. And then there's been some focused work to look at process improvements, particularly for clients who have died and dealing with estates, and also clients where there's a deputyship and dealing with the court of protection. So this is where people don't have capacity to manage their own affairs. In terms of looking forward and the ongoing attention that this area will need, so probably the area that concerns me the most, taking you to page 248, is that column headed 184 to 365 days, so right in the middle. So we've seen, and you'll see it in one of the other graphs, a kind of leveling off in our debt at 1 year plus or 2 year plus, but in this category of 6 months to 1 year, that is larger than we would like it to be. It reflects some progress made with financial assessment and reducing backlogs we've had there. But some of that is debt that looks back a further way, reflects that backlog, and we'll need to kind of keep a close eye and attention on that to stop that becoming kind of more problematic in future. And then to page 252 and section 2.9 finally just summarises the further areas of improvement which we're continuing with. It's actually a timely report to committee because we're moving from a kind of fully enhanced project on this piece of work to closer to a business as usual piece, but still with some enhanced resource this year and attention to the areas kind of set out in that section going forward. So that's the intro, and then as said, Alison and I can answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Tom. Just before I invite members to ask questions, members of the public and maybe some of the new members of this committee might think our finance operation isn't really great given the level of debt that there is and how aged some of the debt is. But unlike maybe some commercial operations, the finance operation doesn't have total control over these debts, and in many cases you're reliant on other parts of the organisation to be able to assist in moving forwards. Would you just care to explain why it is that you just can't take action on all of these, and what you're waiting for, and whom you're waiting for, and also the special circumstances for large amounts of money, for example, individuals who are deceased?
Thank you. Yes, as I say, there's debt right across the council, whether that's from our property estate through to adult social care. We've talked in the report about the relationship with other public sector bodies, and we'll be able to say more on progress with the NHS on that front, picking up the conversation on LDP at hopefully at the SRMP meeting later in the month. I think page 248 is quite helpful as well for showing the kind of different complexity and different reasons for debt management in the adult social care group. This kind of breaks down the different stages and different reasons that we are managing debt and in different ways. So lots of categories there that and so on and so on, subject to complaint, for instance. There may be a secured property charge in place. Again, that kind of outlines and categorises the different reasons for that.
Thank you. Members, Any questions? Graham, we'll start with you.
Thank you. I was impressed by all the reduction in debt and thought all the actions which you were taking were excellent until you got to the end where you started to say, I think, we're beginning to move this into business as usual. And I thought until we really got on top of all this, we should maintain the existing team and emphasis on recovering the debt rather than moving to business as usual. But so maybe we could hear a bit more about that.
Tom.
Thank you. Yes. So I should be clear, we're not back at business as usual yet, but we have been really clear with this project that part of what we needed to do was get to a position where the council is, is facing similar reasons for debt, and particularly for adult social care, that is the same year in, year out, and we need better processes that are kind of long lasting. So that has been the target. But even continuing through this financial year, we have still an additional level of resource, close to an extra 100k invested across one-off resources from both finance and the adult social care team. And myself and one of the service directors in adult social care chairing a monthly program management board. So still with that kind of program management discipline around this area to give it the additional focus it needs. But I think it's a good point, Councillor Wilson, that we need to keep under review, that we don't see, we have seen improvements this year because of some of that risk I kind of flagged up. It may be that we need to kind of increase resource again and look at that further. Alison and I have been talking about that this morning, actually. So it remains under review if we see a worsening in the position.
Thank you. Is that fine, Graham?
Yep, that's very helpful. Thank you. I've got one other point when we finish this, but
okay,
let's discuss the paper first.
Certainly. Any further questions from anyone else? Lewis.
Yes, I have a question. Given the increase in age debt and the challenges in adult social care and debt recovery, what is the impact of that age debt on the council's financial sustainability? How effective have the new debt recovery processes been? And what further improvements are planned to reduce the debt write-offs?
So in terms of financial sustainability, so this is an area that is considered in the financial strategy in the Section 25 statement, but we the level of debt here, it has been kind of it's commonplace across the sector to see a level of debt for this reason. Cambridgeshire probably in a relatively good position and some relative consistency, and I think the steps we've taken this year have really helped. We have had a more unusual interruption on our partner NHS debt during the previous year, which has had a cost to the council. And as I say, we've made some really good progress with that recently, and we'll have a further update to come through on that point. And then in terms of further improvements, they are really summarised at paragraph 2.9. So you'll see things there from, on the digital and systems piece, making it even easier for people to set up direct debits, which often prevents some of the debt collection issues in the first place. How we prompt and remind people, and being mindful, often these are older people as well, having that kind of channel, appropriate kind of channels for making that information as clear as possible. And kind of other areas as well that we'll come on to further this year in looking at where the litigation process is appropriate, how quickly we reach for that, some of the kind of technical or legal tools that we can get in place to secure debt earlier and upfront. Does that address the points that you raised?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Further questions? Well, I'll go back to one of my old favourites, which is the unapplied credits that we have on the debtors ledger. This is where generally we've received money and we haven't been able to, or haven't allocated it against any specific debt. And the total which appears here is £500,000, which is not insignificant compared with the 25 million total that we have on the ledger. However, I have to say that if you look at this in terms of how the unallocated credits have been progressing over the last 2 years, it shows a significant improvement from where we were 2 years ago. And very clearly, this is much more under control than it was previously. And it doesn't really show up very well in the table we've got here, because the table we've got here doesn't have equal periods of account. So if you equalize those periods of account out, it really will show that there's been an improvement there. But what we are left with is still virtually £200,000 of unallocated credits going back more than 2 years. And I just wonder, are those live? Are those ones which are effectively dead and need to be written back?
I can answer that one, Chair. So there's been a particular drive in the income team to reduce these volumes, and we've got a process with the finance teams in terms of writing them back when we've exhausted all avenues. Some of it is a moment in time as well. You know, you might get a large credit come in and what have you, but we've got robust processes in place to manage these, and we're just reviewing the old ones. Some of it's legacy from when the system went in many years ago, how the system auto allocated. So it's still unpicking some of those transactions because you can't back them out. But we have got a process to work through these. As you can see, that's improved from that process.
You can certainly see that the numbers have improved over the last 2 years. That's extremely clear. On the subject of writing off debt, have we given consideration, rather than actual, and we're not just talking about providing debt in the accounts, I'm talking about actual writing off of a debt, have we given any consideration to selling that debt off, to assigning that debt and seeing if we can manage to generate any income from that?
So I don't think we have given any consideration to that, and it would be something we'd want to check out whether that's kind of commonplace across the sector or not. I think that the primary issue, I would say, that is around the clients. So and whether that's appropriate for social care in particular, which is the bulk of this, but it may have a place on sundry or commercial debt. So we'll give that. We'll explore that a little further and see if there's any kind of comparators.
Thank you. Graham.
Have we finished all the other questions about debt? So I wanted to ask Tom a question about fact. And so
I'll leave the room whilst the Vice Chairman takes over.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just ask before you go any further, FACT, perhaps you could just, for the record.
Yes, goodness, I should know this. Well, it's Fenland. Help us out here, Tom.
Fenland Association of Community Transport.
Thank you, Peter. So Fenland Association of Community Transport. In July last year, you gave me an extremely helpful briefing, Tom, about FACT, and the covering email confirmed that there is therefore no write-off required or any accounting decision to be made by committee at this conclusion, which I'm personally comfortable with, but I just feel at some appropriate stage it should come to a committee so that councillors are aware of the quantum of the grant that was originally involved and the activities that officers and PKL, whoever it was, have undertaken with the police investigating FACT. And it could either come to this committee, or it could go to assets and procurement, or it could go to strategy, resources and performance. I don't really mind where it goes, but I just think it should go somewhere just for completeness. And I'm just interested in other people's views on that at this stage.
Thank you. Yes, we'll look at where that's best to report. I'm really mindful this was a very sensitive matter for the council and the organisation involved. But the substantive matters all kind of precede 2021 or earlier, and then there was this lengthy follow-on process. So we'll look at exactly what and where we can report, Councillor Wilson.
And if it is very sensitive, then maybe it needs to go in camera so that it's not in public domain. But I still feel it should at some stage come to councillors, so that more councillors are aware of the final decisions.
Can we take that as just a suggestion and then come to Councillor Poulton, please? I think you wanted to comment.
Yes, may I ask what is the quantum we're talking about there?
So I'm being quite cautious here because I don't think we've had notice of this question, and it was quite a sensitive area. So I don't want to just answer on the spot and give an incorrect answer.
Are you happy that we leave it there? The suggestion has been made and it will come back to either this committee or some other committee for a further report, a clarification of the amounts and the way it is to be dealt with. Chief Executive, do you want to comment?
Thank you, Vice Chair. Just very much affirming the points you've made. I think we'll take that action away as officers, and I will want to take advice from the monitoring officer around the most appropriate committee for that to be reported to. I would also just reaffirm the points that this was a highly sensitive matter, not just within the council or indeed for the organisation concerned, but I am very conscious that we did have the involvement of the constabulary, so I don't want us to be moving into public debate on matters that may be deemed unduly sensitive. I'd therefore suggest we just log that as an action for the Service Director, Finance and Procurement, and we will follow that up accordingly if that's acceptable. Thank you.
If members are happy, we'll leave that matter there. I don't think that for the record it was explained that the reason the chairman left the room is that he is a trustee of FACT. Hopefully he is monitoring proceedings from outside and can now come back in before we close the meeting.
Thank you very much indeed, Peter, for taking over. For those who just had any uncertainty about why I left the room, it's because I'm a trustee of FACT. And we don't normally make it a practice for a vice chair's first meeting to throw him right into the cauldron like that. But I'm very grateful for Peter for taking over as necessary. Right, are there any other items that we have in this agenda item 10, debt management update? Any further questions? None. So the report recommendations were being asked to note the actions and approach being taken to manage income collection and debt recovery, and I believe we have so noted. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you to you, Tom and Alison. Right, we now move on to agenda item 11, which is the agenda plan. This is the committee agenda plan which Democratic Services look after for us. Would the Democratic Services Officer please advise us of any updates to the published report?
Thank you, Chair. No, there are no changes to the published paper.
Do any members have any comments or questions about it? No, good. Peter?
I see none.
Good. Okay, thank you very much indeed. So we can note the agenda plan. And the committee training plan is agenda item 12. That's the final item of business for today. Are there any comments or questions about what is proposed? Nothing. If things occur to members before the next meeting, please do contact me or contact member services. We're always keen to move forwards on training. So we're being asked to approve the committee training plan. Are we all happy to do so? Yes, thank you very much indeed, members. That concludes today's business, and the committee will next meet on Wednesday, the 23rd of July, and I declare the meeting closed. Thank you all for your attendance. Thank you.